Hello everyone and welcome to the Daily Splat. Today we're going to be discussing the subject of privacy. Now privacy is something that has, something that basically I don't think is as accessible anymore. Quite simply, the world has changed a lot in the last 10 years and privacy, I think now, is a slightly almost redundant policy in some respects. Now, of course, recently there's been this thing you might have heard of called WikiLeaks, which has certainly made it quite difficult for even governments to continue to be private. But the fact is that recently, in the last few years, what with the advent of things such as the social networking site and, just everyone being able to access the internet now virtually, it's such a big community. The whole world can get in there. That's how you're looking at me right now. Basically, there is a certain shattering of the concept of privacy. Now, obviously, I'm not saying privacy is completely dead and it is impossible to have secrets, because that's not true. That's always going to be possible, the things I could tell you about myself, but I'm not going to, because I don't wish to share the fact that I've never had Vegemite before. Okay, right. Anyway, so yes, privacy. But the question with privacy at the moment is, I suppose, what do you do about it? Like, for example, how important is privacy? Certainly on a governmental level, what with the whole WikiLeaks thing, I think you could argue it's very important that certain documents aren't released, but at the same time, is that suppressing free speech? Well, yes, it is, but then you get the subject of how much free speech people can have, and all this stuff, and it's a very, very complicated issue. But I think, as a whole, this lack of ability now to keep things secret may actually be a good thing, because you might actually have to be honest with everyone, and surely that can't be a bad thing. Honesty, I believe, is the best policy for the most part. For example, I was reading this excellent article by the comedian Frank Skinner, who writes articles for certain newspapers, and indeed I believe they get published in the Australian as well for local listeners. And he wrote this excellent article I was reading yesterday called "Privacy Lost, but You've Got to Love WikiLeaks." You can find it, and it's a good read. I'll actually link it on my Twitter page and on the old Facebook as well. By the way, if you're trying to find me, a good way to keep in touch with these videos is Twitter. Just follow @Splatticus, @SPLATTICUS. So I'll post it there. But in the article, he talks about the good and bad things about WikiLeaks, but he also talks about how things such as Twitter are making it very hard for him to maintain a low profile. For example, he says, this is from the article, quote, "I went to watch a comedy show a while back, and it said on Twitter that I never laughed once. It was true, but by the time it became cyber gossip, I diplomatically told the comedian how brilliant they'd been. I recently arrived home on a snowy night and told my girlfriend I had to take the underground. I know, she said. It was on Twitter. Thank goodness I'm not sleeping around." So yes, there you go. Certainly for notable people, such as celebrities and that sort of thing, it's very, very hard for them to keep a privacy thing. But also, I think it is becoming slightly harder for normal people as well to maintain a certain degree of privacy. I don't think this is a really recent thing. I think you can look back as far as the introduction of CCTV as being quite crucial. Frank Skinner actually talks in his article about the fact that he lost 3 points on his license because CCTV footage caught him going through a red light. Now, if you've got things like, the CCTV footage watching you, and you've got, your updates on social network websites that people can go back and check you out on, and just the fact that it's much easier for us to keep a track on where everyone is and what they're up to. Does this mean that we as people have to modify our behaviour? Does this mean that we have to actually become, decent, honest people. Personally, I believe it does, actually, unless you want to get caught in. I think it's going to be quite difficult for philanderous activities to be continued. I mean, you just have to look at what happened to Tiger Woods, really, and all the revelations that came out, and how quickly that spread from the initial incident with the car and the wife and the golf club and things like that. So it's a very, very interesting time that we live in, and also a very accountable time. But should we be forced to be more honest? Some people would argue, well, I don't want to be regulated and watched in that sort of respect, in a sort of, 1984 Big Brother kind of way, very sort of spooky paranoia of being watched all the time. Well, the fact of the matter is, nowadays it's pretty hard not to be watched, particularly if you allow yourself onto the social networking places such as Facebook and Twitter. And I think if you sign up to these things, you've got to be aware of the consequences of them. That if you do go onto these things, and you use them quite frequently, and you use them openly, people are going to be able to find out things about you. People are going to be able to find out, for example, that I am a very, very die-hard Manchester United fan. That said, they can find out in other ways as well. Anyway, my basic point of the day is privacy. Someone's coming, so I better finish. Privacy is harder to keep, but I think that this whole thing with privacy being harder to regulate is it means that we just have to be a bit more honest with each other. Ta-ta!